Hi, I'm Dan Cortopassi. Today I'm reviewing an HO scale high hood SD45 locomotive from ScaleTrains. My model is decorated in the Southern Railway black and white scheme patched as a VMV lease unit. ScaleTrains has done two road numbers in this paint scheme, 3123 and 3156. ScaleTrains offers these models in two versions. The factory direct price for the DCC ready version is $189.99. I paid $279.99 for my DCC and sound equipped version from the ScaleTrains website. We'll start the model at 100 possible points. The locomotive is packed in a durable cardboard box lined with foam. Inside is an owner's manual with DCC and other information. A two-piece plastic cradle protects the model. The trucks have plastic supports that need to be removed before the locomotive is put on the track. The handrails have foam protectors. This is a good box that should protect the model for storage and transport. According to the dieselshop.us, Southern Railway 3123 was from a group of SD45s numbered 3105 to 3169 built between 1967 and 1970. From what I've been able to determine, many of these units lasted past the Norfolk Southern merger until the mid-1980s. It appears that only a few of these units were repainted into NS colors. By the late 1980s, many of these locomotives became lease units. I found two different photos online of VMV 3123 operating on the Southern Pacific in 1988 and 1989. Other photos show similar units in lease service into the 1990s. My model of VMV 3123 looks to be a good match to the photos that I found. Like many Southern Railway units, these SD45s were set up to run long hood forward. The F for front is on the end that would be the back of the unit on most other railroads. This setup also meant that the engineer's control console was on the opposite side of the unit for most other railroads, and it faced the long hood end. It's hard to see, but the model has a cab interior and the control console is in the correct orientation. ScaleTrains got a lot of the small details right, including the unusual rectangular sunshades, the end-mounted bell, and the antennas on top of the short hood. There are a couple of small errors. In my photo, the locomotive lacked wind deflectors on the fireman's side, though these could probably be removed without too much trouble. The model is much cleaner looking than the real locomotive. In my photos, on the fireman's side, the Southern could still be seen like ghostwriting behind the VMV logo. Likewise for the Southern Railway herald on the rear of the engine. I'm not really sure what this small detail is. It looks like some kind of a filler cap maybe. Whatever it is, the photos show that it should be higher up on the short hood on 3123. This would be difficult to move, though I'm guessing it probably wouldn't bother most people since it's such a small detail. Since this is pretty minor, I'm going to take 2.5 points for this one. The paint on the model is opaque and thin enough not to obscure detail. All of the markings are crisp and the striping is free of voids in most places. Tiny stencils and other small writing are legible with magnification. There is some black showing through in the edge of the cab subbase, but this is very small and could be concealed with some weathering. I really like the diagonal striping on the pilots. One thing that I also like is that the paint on the inertial filter and radiator grills is a very dark gray, not black. This makes for a very subtle color variation from the locomotive body and makes the grills look like they have more depth than they really do. The model has all of the detail most modelers could want, including the nicely done brake wheel and lots of plumbing under the sill. Like most of the other ScaleTrains SD45s that I've reviewed and many other models with plastic handrails, the stanchions are crooked in some places. This spoils the look of an otherwise outstanding model, so I'm taking 5 points. Thankfully, the shorter plastic handrails on the ends of the models don't seem to have this issue. The short side handrails behind the cab do seem to want to pop off on my unit. I'll talk about that more later. On the cab, the model has separately applied windshield wipers. The cab windows slide open and closed. I found them a little difficult to move. The cab has a full interior. As I mentioned previously, this is installed with the control console facing the long hood. Up front, the model has freestanding grab irons and an MU connector. The drop steps look like they should be able to be put in the upright position, but they seem fragile, so I'm not going to try it. The pilot has uncoupling levers with notches at the corners and air hoses. In back, the model also has freestanding grab irons. The rear pilot is similar to the front. On top of the cab, the model has a horn and antennas, as I mentioned previously. The dynamic brake and radiator fans have see-through grills. The exhaust and the small grill on top of the inertial filter hatch are also see-through. Be careful not to pick up the model by the dynamic brake blister. This part comes off, revealing the Loc 5 DCC decoder and other electronics. Underneath, the model has plenty of detail. The sander lines can hit the truck's side frames when the trucks pivot. I don't currently have any way to test the models to see if this would cause any operational issues. All of the wheels pick up current and all the axles are powered. The locomotive has ScaleTrains body-mounted knuckle couplers on both ends. The front coupler is low, so I'm taking 5 points. The rear coupler is also low. All of the wheels are in gauge according to the NMRA standards gauge. There is no noticeable body wobble. The model weighs 20.3 ounces. Drawbar pull peaked at 4.2 ounces on my force gauge. This is higher than the 3.5 ounces I measured on some of my other ScaleTrains SD45s, which is interesting considering that the overall weight is about the same. I'm running the model on DCC. So now the answer to the burning question. Since these engines ran long hood forward, I was really curious to see if ScaleTrains set up the model to do that. I won't keep you in suspense, it does. With the model set to move forward, it moves with the long hood in front. I can imagine someone who isn't familiar with the way that Southern set up a lot of its diesels thinking that there's something wrong with the model, but there isn't. It's not a bug, it's a feature. Kidding aside, this is something to keep in mind when setting up this engine in a consist. If desired, the normal direction of travel could be reversed by reprogramming the decoder. Speaking of programming, I checked the engine with my loc programmer, and sure enough, the normal direction of travel is reversed for most other locomotives. That means that there's no difference in the chassis wiring between this model and other ScaleTrains SD45s. If you wanted to change the sound file in the decoder, be sure to keep this in mind. A generic SD45 sound file from ESU will make the engine run cab end first by default. F8 turns on the sound as well as the number boards and ground lights. F0 turns on the headlights, which are directional. The forward headlight comes on when the locomotive is set to move forward. The rear headlight comes on when the locomotive is set to move backward. F5 cycles the class lights. They can be white, green, red, or off. F12 dims the headlights. The engine starts and stops smoothly. It could probably be even smoother with some tweaking of the motor control CVs. F1 rings the bell. F2 sounds the horn. The loc sound decoder has a variety of horn sounds to choose from. This is the one that was set up as the default in this model. F10 is the independent brake. Pressing F10 will make the locomotive slow down and stop. Pressing it again will make it go. F9 activates the drive hold feature. This can be used to simulate the prime mover revving as the heavy train moves slowly. It can also be used to simulate an engine that's coasting. F4 turns on the dynamic brake sounds. I prefer KD couplers, so I'm going to swap the couplers and fix the coupler height at the same time. I'll start by removing the coupler screw. These were really tight on my model and it took some work to get them loose. The coupler box fell apart as the screw came out. Use care not to damage the uncoupling levers or other details when removing the parts. I'll get rid of the coupler spring as the whisker couplers don't need that. KD158s drop into the factory draft gear boxes. Installation is the reverse of removal. Unfortunately, both couplers are still very low. Removing the couplers is also how you remove the shell. To avoid damaging details while I file the coupler mounting pads, I'll work on the model with the shell off. Unfortunately, because the screw threads are under the sill, I'll need to put the shell back on to test the coupler height. I also added an 010 Styrene Shim to the bottom of the draft gear box. It took some filing and trial and error, but I finally got the couplers where I want them. I'll use some canopy glue to keep the shorter side handrails from coming loose. This glue is water soluble, so if any excess gets on the model, it's easy to remove. It could still use some weathering, but this engine is now ready for service. Let's see what we've got. A small detail on the short hood is in the wrong place, so I took 2.5 points in the prototype accuracy category. The model has crooked handrails, so I took 5 points in the paint and detail category. Both couplers were at the wrong height, so I took a total of 10 points in the standards and operation category. That leaves us with a total of 82.5 out of a possible 100 points, which would be a B on a report card. This is a nice model and it deserves a green signal. I think ScaleTrains did a pretty nice job with this model. If you're looking for some leased motive power for your HO scale model railroad, then I think you might like it.